So let's go ahead and we'll start the process of installing SQL Server. So the assumption is that you have already downloaded your SQL Server installation, and you've also downloaded your SAP Business One installation. So again, just open up your web browser, go to the appropriate locations. For me, I have an MSDN license that, or an MSDN subscription that I use for all my Microsoft development and testing licenses. So I get my SQL Server from the MSDN website, and of course I download the SAP Business One from the SAP Channel Partner Portal. So I've done both of those. So let's go now through the process of getting those installed. Now what you'll notice on my SQL Server machine, which is what I've connected to now, so I've done a remote desktop connection into my remote desktop server machine, and then I'm using the remote desktops admin tool, and I've set up links to all of my remote desktops. So I'm now connected to the instance that I'm going to use for SQL Server, and I've got 4 different drives here. I've got a system, a database, a transaction log, and a tempdb drive. So I've just put my installation files on the tempdb drive for now. So I'm going to go in here and I will open up SQL Server. Now, one thing you need to just do before you start your installation, just go and make sure you've got enough space on all of the drives where you're going to load up your information. Now you'll see one of the things here with my system drive, what the TATA platform used to do when I started this process. When it created a new system drive for an environment, it would only be 20 gigabytes. Well, that tends to be a little bit too small. Now, as a result of a recent upgrade that has been done, they're now issuing system drives which are 50 gig in size. So this won't be an issue for you going forwards, but you can occasionally be in a situation where you'll run out of system space. So I always make it a rule never to install anything on that system drive anyway. So I'm going to put all of my executables, I'm going to put them on my tempdb drive just for the sake of the exercise here. So again, let's go back here into my tempdb, and you'll see here is my SQL Server, and this is where my installation files are located. So I'm going to go in. I always make it a habit when I'm installing it on the server to go in and right click on the application and choose to run as administrator. So I've answered OK, and now you'll see that my SQL Server installation is going ahead. So I'll go here to installation, and I want to click on here. I want to do a new installation, so I'll choose that. And this is basically the standard SQL Server 2008 R2 setup. So if you're familiar with this, you can skip this part of the video and move on to the next one. If not, I'm going to run you through that process. So it's doing its prerequisite checks. I'll click on OK. It's picking up a product key again because that's preloaded in my MSDN version. I'm going to accept the license terms, and then I'll say next. It's going to ask to go ahead and set up the support file, so I'll say install, and we'll let that run. And so now you'll see it's moved on to the next stage where it's running a few more rule checks. Again, it's just giving me a warning here that I do need to open up my Windows Firewall port 1433, and that's okay, so I'll say next, and then I'll choose the options that I want. So in this case, it's a SQL Server feature installation. You don't need to choose all features because you don't really need the SQL Server Power Pivot for SharePoint. So we'll say next, and then you can choose the instances that, of the instance features that you want. So in my instance, I want database engine services. I'll put in my full text search, and I'll add I'll add analysis services, and I'll add reporting services. I want my client tools connectivity. I usually like to have the SQL Server books online, and of course I like my complete management tools, and that's pretty much it. That's all I need for running my SQL Server in this environment. You can add the additional components if you believe you're going to have a need for those, but in my particular instance I don't, so we'll leave that as it is. Now this is the important part. Remember I said I don't want to install on my C drive. Where do I want to install on? Go back and look at my computer. Where have I got my space? So I'm going to install my executables on my temp DB because I've allowed plenty of space for that, and the executables don't get hit that much, so you know, we don't have to worry too much about that. So we'll go there, and again, might be nice if I make a note of what the drive is. It's the G drive. So we'll come back here, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to replace the C with G. And same scenario here, replace the C with G, and we'll say next. It's going to run its next set of checks, make sure that's all okay. And you can see 6 are passed, no warnings, and it's skipped 18, which is fine. So I'll now say next. Now it wants the name of the instance. I'm going to set this up with a default instance, but of course you can go and create a specific instance name that you want to use. Another important point, you want to go in here and you also again want to change where these components will be stored. So again, I'll change that to my G drive, and that's all okay. And then I'll say next. Going to move to the next phase. Do the disk space check. That's all been validated, and I've got enough disk space, so everything's okay there. And I'll say next, and we'll let the installation continue on. Now this is where you need to set up your account names that you want the services to run under. Now you've got a couple of choices. You can create dedicated account names. It's up to you. My recommendation is you follow Microsoft best practice and you set up a dedicated account name for these services to run under. All right, but for now, just because I like to keep it nice and simple, I'm going to use my user account. I'm going to run it under the user account of administrator. Okay, so we'll do that here as well. And what I can do, if I want to, just to make this whole process a little bit easier, I'll just finish putting this one in, is I can go here and I can say use the same account for all the services, in which case I can just click here and do a browse, go out and search my Active Directory, pick my username. In this case it's administrator. I'll do a check names, and that's found that and validated, so that's okay. Put in my administrator password and say okay to that, and what you'll notice is it goes ahead and it sets that as the username for all of those services, which I'm fine with. But again, like I said, best practice is to set a dedicated username for those services to run under. I'll say next. And your authentication mode, remember with SAP Business One, you do want to have mixed mode available to you. So I'm going to select mixed mode, and now I want to specify a password for my SA account. So you put in the password that you've decided to use for your SA account, and then you can also, if you want to, is you can add the current user as a SQL administrator, which I'm going to do. Now, next step, very important, you want to now set your default data directories. So, where do you want to put your user database directories? Now remember, I've set up a couple of different drives. So, I want to put my databases on my E drive, transaction logs on F, and temp DBs on G. Alright, so databases will be on E, so I'll go in here and I'll change that to E. I want my logs on F. I want my temp DB and my temp DB logs. Again, I want those on G, so I didn't really need to change that. Now, where do I want to put my backups? Again, up to you. Depending on the amount of traffic you're going to get on the system, you can set up a dedicated backup volume. But in this particular instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to store my backups. Let's have a look and see where have I got enough space. So I've got 1 terabyte here on my databases. I'm going to put my backups on the E drive as well. Keep flipping across into Firefox. We don't want to do that. So backup directory, I'll set that to be my E drive also. So then I'll say next. So that's all good. I'm happy with that. Now asking me which users have access for analysis services. Again, I'm going to add the current user. Again, we want to go and set our directories. So my data directory is going to be E. My log directory will be F. And my temp DB will be G. My backup directory will be E. Same as what I did before. That's done. Now it's asking me for my reporting services. How do I want that configured? I'm just going to install the native mode default configuration. So I'll say next. And next. That's it. It's checked. 6 are passed, 2 are skipped, no failures and no warnings. So we're good to go. I'll say next. Just providing a summary now of what the configuration looks like. This is where it's going to save the configuration details. So now I'll choose install and we'll let the SQL Server installation go ahead and complete. Okay, so now our SQL Server has completed its installation. I'll say close. That's it. We're now done. So what I'll do just to make sure that it's all gone through correctly is I will go up here, click on Start, go into my programs. Let's go and have a look at SQL Server 2008 R2. Let's open up our SQL Management Studio. And I'll just minimize my Explorer there. Put in my server name. Now I can put in the local server name. So in this case it's SBO demo CL SQLA. And then I can use my Windows authentication, but I always like to test the SQL authentication, so I'll log in as SA and put in the SA password and say connect. And there we have it. We've got a connection through to our SQL server. It's running, and that's all fine. I can right click on here. I can check my properties and I can make sure everything's running fine here. How many processes it's using. Look at my database settings. There we go. There's my default locations for my database and my logs. So that's exactly how I want it. So our SQL Server is now ready to go. So the next step that I want to take is I want to go ahead and I want to install my SAP Business One. SAP Business One, I've been onto the channel partner portal and I've downloaded those files, and again you'll see I actually have a directory here called SAP Downloads, and that's where I've unpacked my installation files. Now right now our current patch release is patch level 9, but the current full install is patch level 4, so that's why you'll see I've downloaded the full install release, and I've also downloaded patch level 9, so that's ready to be applied as well. So we'll go in, I'm going to run my auto run. I'll go in here and I'll say I want to run as administrator. Again, same scenario. What do I want to install? In this particular instance, I'm going to install the server. I'll say next. I want to do a full installation, so I'll choose install. It's going to install the Visual C++, so I'll let that run through. That's done. It automatically launches into the server tools setup. I'll say next. Again, put in the details that you want to have logged against this this installation. And then I'm going to choose to do a custom install, because I always like to do a custom install. It gives me the most control. I'm going to change my destination folder, of course. And once again, I'm going to put this on my G drive, because remember, that's where I want to put all of my executables. So that's fine. And do I want to install the mailer? Yes, I do. So I'll say next. Again, create my B1 site user and create the password. Always important, make sure you write down these passwords because you will use them again. If you've done this a few times, after a while you get all kinds of different passwords floating around in your head, so it's always a great idea to write that down. So that's my server tools is now installed, and then it's going to move on to the next step in the installation. So now it's going to go to the server setup. Okay, same scenario. We'll go in here, we'll say next. And this is my sample company that I always use when I'm doing installations of demo systems and so on. So I want to do a custom install here again because I want to choose the different company or different country localizations that I want to install sample databases for. Again, change my destination folder, choose my G drive. I'll say OK. And next. It's automatically detected it's a SQL 2008, which is fine. I'll say next. Give that a few seconds. Now just validating back to the SQL server. And it's been able to log on. So yes, that's my server name. Of course, if I've got a different instance, I would have to choose the server name and the instance, but this is fine. I put in my SA username and my password. I'll say next. Now, what do I want to install? Which of my demo databases do I want? Well, right now, for the purposes of this this example, I'm just going to install a couple of databases. I'm just going to have my United States database, and I'm going to have, I don't know, let's say, I might load up a UK database as well. So let's scroll back up, and there it is. There's my UK database. So I'm going to put in two databases, my help, my SAP add-ons, and that's all great. So now I'll say next. Now, important point to note, when we're looking in a little while at the setup of the cloud control center, it can sometimes be helpful if you're going to be hosting databases for multiple countries, multiple localizations, and you're going to be hosting demo environments for multiple people, then it's worthwhile installing all of the demo databases for the countries in which you're going to be operating. Okay, because you'll then be able to do a backup of that database, and you can use that database backup as a template for deploying new demo companies. Alright, so we'll talk more about that when we start installing the Cloud Control Center and working on that, but again, worth keeping in mind. So in this case though, I'm going to say next, just those two sample databases, next, and we'll let the installation run, and then we'll come back once we're ready to move on to the next step. So now it's going to go ahead and it's going to create our SBO common, then it's going to create our UK and our US demo databases, so we'll let that run through. And now you can see we're installing our demonstration databases. And our US demo database is also now being installed. And now our UK demo database is being installed. And that's the installation of the SAP Business One server is completed, and now it's moving on and installing the remote support platform. We do want the remote support platform to be installed here, so I'm going to install both the agent service and the agent console. So we'll choose next. Again, it's now asking us what's the name of our database server where we're going to have all of this installed. Again, I'll put in my server name. And again, my database user ID and password. And then I'll say next. And now what it's asking me to do is set up a user account for the remote support platform. So I'm going to create a user account. In this case, I'm just going to call it administrator. And give it a password. And put in my email address. Okay, then I'll say next. Specify my destination folder once again. Remember, not installing anything on the C drive, so I'm going to put this on the G drive. I'm going to create the folder. That's it. Answer next and let the installation go ahead. Alright, I don't want to launch the agent console right now. I'm going to do that later. So I'll just choose finish. And now I'll say finish there. And the next step is for the Outlook integration server installer to run, and then after that we will have our integration platform will be installed. So I'll leave that as it is. Yes, that's where I want it to go. It's on the G drive. So next. And again, this isn't particularly exciting, but I did want to make sure I showed you each step. So if you're not familiar with installing SAP Business One and all the components of that, you can certainly refer to this. Let that run through, say finish. That's now done. Our server tools are installed, our Business One server is installed, and our Outlook integration server add-on is also installed. So our next step after we finish doing our server installation is we want to go ahead and we want to install the SAP Business One client, which will install all of the DI API components for us as well. And then we're going to go and we're going to install the integration component. So right now I'll just choose the client, and I can add some additional components if I want to. So in this case I'm just going to add the SDK, and I'll say install. We'll let the installation start up. And again, don't forget, we don't want to install the Business One client on the C drive. We actually want to go ahead and install it on the G drive. So when this comes up, we're going to change the installation location. So I'll say next. Again, put in my username and company name. And next. Alright, we now want to choose the browse option, and again I'm going to go here and change it from the C drive to the G drive. We'll say OK to that, and next. And we'll let the installation now go ahead and run. So it's going to install, of course, our SAP Business One. It's going to install the Crystal Reports runtime and all of the other DI components that we need. We'll put in our license server name, which of course is the SQL server, because that's where the license server is running. Now don't forget, one of the things you're also going to need to do is you're also going to have to go into the Windows Firewall settings, and you want to make sure you open up that port that the license service is running on. So that'll be port 30,000, and you also need to install the following port, so port 30,001, and we'll do that in a second as soon as our Business One installation is finished. And of course, because this is my SQL Server, I don't have Microsoft Office installed, so it's normal to get this message saying that Excel is required but not installed, because of course Excel is required for the Excel reporter. So I'll just say OK on that. It's nothing to worry about. And then the next component will go ahead and load. So we'll say finish. And now we're going to load up the SDK as well, just to make sure that we've got all the right components on our SQL Server and our integration server. I'll do a custom install, because what I want to do is I want to go and select again a different drive to the C drive. Again, I'll select the G drive. Which components do I want to load? Well, I'm going to load all of them, and I'll say next, and we'll let that run. And that's it, our components are now loaded. So what we can do is, now that that's complete, I can go back to previous and I can choose to install the integration component. I'm just going to make sure everything's running okay here with Business One first though. So I'll start up SAP Business One. I'm going to log in, and of course, because this is the first time I've done I've accessed the system, my username and password will be the default, which will be manager. It's going to ask me for the IP address or server name for the license server. And I'll select that. And then I choose the company that I want. So in this case, it's the US company. Just put in my manager again. Choose the company. And it brings me in, and you can see I now have a running SAP Business One system, which of course is running in evaluation mode for 30 days until such time as I put in my license keys. But that's the main thing I wanted to do. I wanted to just double check that I do have a functional Business One installation. So that's working. I'm happy with that. So I'm going to go and I'm going to install the integration component now. So I'll choose the integration component and I'll say install. And we'll run through the process now of installing our integration framework, or B1IF. Again, I'm going to change the default directory. Remember, I'm putting all my executables on the G drive. And it's just reminding me what components are going to be installed, so I'll say next. Now, it wants a B1I admin username, so I'll put in a password that I want for the B1I admin username, and then after we've done the installation, we'll log on to the integration framework and just make sure everything is okay with this username and password. So I'll say next. Install the necessary C++ runtimes that the integration framework needs. And because this is a 64-bit environment, it's going to also install all of the Java virtual machines for the 64-bit environment. It's a SQL Server database, so that's fine. Put in my SA username and password. Make sure that's all working. It's then testing the connection. I say next. Setting up the necessary components on the database. Now it's copying the 64-bit Java virtual machine, and it's importing in the pre-built data sets for our integration solution database. So all the pre-built integration components are now being installed into the Business One integration framework. So we'll give that a couple of seconds. It's now installing the event sender. And in a second we're going to get a configuration screen where we're going to need to put in a couple more parameters. It's applying the B1I admin password that we specified, And of course now we have to put in a username that we want to use for our B1I user. So I'll put in the password, because we're going to leave the B1I username as B1I. I can see that everything's been installed correctly. I've got all of the necessary Java components, and that's being pointed to in the right location. It's the right Business One server, the right details for the license server. So that's all good. I'll now say next. Couple of extra components here. Do you want to switch on some of these built-in integrations? So for example, the payroll support for Germany, the Business One mobile solution, I always recommend that you install that. And do you want to activate support for electronic invoices for the Mexican localization? So again, if you're going to host all these different localizations in your environment, you'll want to activate all of these. Or if you're only going to support for other localizations other than Germany or Mexico, you can leave those switched off. In this case, I'm going to switch them on because I want to be able to load up demonstration data for every single company and every single localization eventually. So I'm going to leave those switched on, and then I'll say next. So now it's going to finalize the installation of that. It takes a couple of seconds. It's going to go ahead and bring in and activate those components, and you'll see it will initialize a couple of those components as well. So there's a little bit of waiting time while that initialization takes place, and then it checks to make sure everything's initialized properly and moves on. And this is one of the great things about the integration of B1IF. It's now very, very simple, very, very smooth, and tends to work 99.99% of the time if you've got all of the right components installed. Please make sure that before you try to install the integration component, that you do make sure you've installed the Business One client, because otherwise you'll be missing the DI API components, and you'll then have to go back in afterwards and do some manual configuration. If you've done it the right way, following the order that I've used, then everything will work smoothly and you won't have to go and change anything. The only things you'll then have to do, of course, is open up the necessary ports on the firewall, A, to allow the license server to be communicated with the other machines in your cloud environment, and then B, to also, if you're going to use the mobile scenario, you want to open up the appropriate ports that the mobile scenario is looking to communicate on. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later in one of our other implementation videos. So now this is that integration server initialization that I was talking about. So it's waiting for the Apache Tomcat server to spin up. Make sure that's all worked correctly, and then it'll do a test to see that it can connect. And once that's all done, it'll then move on to the next stage. Alright, so that's now complete. So we'll choose Finish, and that's worked successfully. So we can close that down now. So quick thing I want to do, I just want to now test to make sure my integration framework is running. So I go up here, click on Start, come into All Programs. You'll now see I have my integration solution for SAP Business One. There's my integration framework, and here I'm going to put in my username. So we've got to put in our username and password, and remember that these are case sensitive, so you need to make sure you get it exactly right. So I'll put those in, and I'll click on OK. And once I see that that's working, then I can close that down. And that's it. My Business One server is now completely ready and completely set up. So the next step, of course, is we want to go in and we want to install SAP Business One on our remote desktop server. So we'll do that in our next session. So I look forward to seeing you in that session.